On another matter, Mr. President, this last week, President Biden spoke at his State of the Union address about the looming debt crisis, but he turned it, instead of a plea for unity and bipartisanship and working together, he turned it into political fear-mongering and finger-pointing. He even suggested that Republicans want to cut funding for Social Security and Medicare, on which millions upon millions of seniors depend, something that could not be further from the truth. You might call it the big lie. Speaker McCarthy is leading debt ceiling discussions for Republicans, and he has been absolutely clear that these programs are not on the chopping block. As the American people witnessed last Tuesday evening, Republicans all agree on this point. Social Security and Medicare are a lifeline for seniors and some of the most vulnerable people in our country. And these programs are not going anywhere, period. But what the President and our Democratic colleagues have failed to acknowledge is that the status quo is not sustainable, particularly when it comes to Social Security. We're told by the actuaries that unless Congress does something, Social Security and Medicare will become insolvent and incapable of paying the benefits upon which millions of seniors depend. I have to ask whether the President, by this fear-mongering, made it easier or harder for us to work together to meet our responsibilities and to eliminate the threat of insolvency, which we are on a path to if Congress does nothing. Did the President make it more likely that Republicans and Democrats would work together to provide for the solvency and survival of Social Security or Medicare by fear-mongering and finger-pointing? Well, I think we all know he did not. Projections show that Social Security recipients will see a reduction of almost 25% in their benefits if nothing changes. So we know we have to do something. Texans who live on a fixed income cannot handle a 25% cut. They're already struggling to keep up with inflation as things are, which is now about 6.5%. That's essentially a pay cut for the American people, thanks to the profligate spending of our Democratic colleagues in this administration. But a 25% reduction is absolutely unfathomable. Given the strong bipartisan support for Social Security that we saw last week, I hope we will all agree that we can't allow these programs to run out of money. There's a clear bipartisan desire to save Social Security. Last Congress, Senators Romney of Utah and Senator Manchin of West Virginia introduced the Trust Act to rescue Social Security. I was proud to co-sponsor that legislation, and I hope it will gain some momentum this year. Unfortunately, the White House has already slammed the door on that possibility once again. So we see a trend here where instead of engaging in a bipartisan manner with members of Congress to try to solve problems, the President just makes things harder and less likely for those consultation and that cooperation to occur. A White House spokesman even described commissions like the one that the bill would create as a, quote, death panel for Social Security and Medicare. Yet, 4 decades ago, then Senator Biden voted for Social Security reforms proposed by what he now refers to as a death panel. And those reforms extended the program for another 50 years. 2 years ago, the Senate voted Senator Romney's Trust Act as an amendment to the Democrats' reckless budget, and it actually passed by a vote of 71 to 29. That is, more than 20 of our Democratic colleagues voted for it. A strong bipartisan vote, 71 to 29. So it's completely irresponsible for the President to claim that Republicans want to cut Social Security and Medicare and then demagogue the very bipartisan efforts to protect the longevity of these programs. How shameful and irresponsible is that? Whether or not the president will admit it, he knows that Social Security is operating on borrowed time. We need to ensure its long-term success, and the Trust Act is a great starting point for conversations to do just that. Of course, this is just one small part of the major changes we need to see to get our fiscal house in order. The national debt is now $31.5 trillion. Congress can't raise the debt limit and continue to borrow and spend like there's no tomorrow. Interest on that $31 trillion debt approaches $1 trillion a year. That means more and more of the discretionary spending that we need in order to defend our country or to support other priorities goes up in smoke because we have to pay interest on that $31.5 trillion in borrowed money. Yes, we do need to avoid a debt crisis, and no one in Congress wants us to default on our debts. But we also need to enact broader reforms to change the trajectory of this out-of-control spending. Last week, I was proud to join with Senator Hyde-Smith of Mississippi in introducing an amendment to the Constitution that would require a balanced budget. I've authored and voted for similar legislation in the past, and I believe that this is a critical component to smart spending reforms. Families, businesses, and state and local governments all have no choice but to balance their budget. If there's not money coming in the front door, they can't spend it out the back door, unless, of course, you're the federal government and you print money. The federal government's the only glaring exception to this common sense financial practice, and we're seeing the consequences. The national debt has skyrocketed from $3.2 trillion in 1980 to $9.7 trillion in 2000, and then to $31.5 trillion today. It's more than tripled since 2000. It's past time to take action to address this growing debt crisis, and there's real-world evidence that balanced budgets work. Every state in the nation, including Texas, has one, and we are far from operating in the red like the federal government. In fact, Texas has gone into the current legislative session with a $33 billion surplus. You don't do that by borrowing money and forcing your children and grandchildren to pay the bills. You do it by responsible budgeting. I've always been a proponent of taking the Texas model nationwide, and this is an example of my state's smart fiscal policies in action that the federal government needs to emulate. One of the earliest lessons we teach our children is about only spending the money that you have and not spending money you don't have. It's time to apply that same common sense logic to the federal government. So I appreciate Senator Hyde-Smith's leadership on this bill, and I'm proud to be one of the 23 co-sponsors and would invite all of our colleagues to consider joining us in co-sponsoring this legislation. Now you might wonder, is this just some Republican trick or not? Well, it's interesting to note that the current occupant of the White House, President Biden, voted for a balanced budget amendment when he was a member of the United States Senate. And he didn't just do it once, he didn't just do it twice, he did it 3 times. Then Senator Biden voted for a balanced budget amendment in March of 1995 when the debt was $4.9 trillion. In June of 1966, he voted for a balanced budget amendment when the debt was $5.1 trillion. And in March of 1997, when the debt stood at $5.4 trillion, Joe Biden, then Senator Biden, voted for a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. My Republican colleagues have offered a range of proposals to rein in the national debt and to get America's spending habits in check. And all of these ideas should be part of a serious discussion to address this crisis. If you strip away the agreements about how we got here and the best path forward, there's one unavoidable truth. When it comes to finances, the United States is on an unsustainable course. The national debt will haunt every generation until leaders show enough courage to make tough choices and fix this mess. And I can't think of any better time than now. So I hope President Biden will stop the fear-mongering and stop the demagoguing and take this crisis seriously. Republicans and Democrats alike want to avoid a debt crisis, but so far we haven't taken the necessary steps to rein in the irresponsible spending and to support and sustain and save important programs like Social Security and Medicare for future generations. These are popular, common sense goals, and I hope that our Democratic colleagues will stop playing politics and start talking about solutions. I yield the floor.